Hi everybody, welcome to Newton Community Farm and Newton Community Farm's YouTube channel. This is our first episode of Wednesday Gardening being filmed outside in the Learning Garden, which is very exciting. My name's Hope, if I haven't met you yet, and today we're going to be talking about peppers. And behind the lens today on camera duty, we have Jay Villar.
Hello everybody.
He's our technical person for the day, and he may be asking a few questions during this session. So if you hear a voice, it's our Jay Villar. So I want to give you a little bit of a show of the Learning Garden, show you our peppers before we talk about that. But I have one small announcement to make before we jump into peppers. Newton Community Farm is now offering our weekly healthy harvest bags, and they are fresh seasonal produce from our farm here in Newton. And they are available for pre-order online. And every pickup is Friday afternoon, so you'll get the opportunity to select your pickup schedule time when you order. And the price and the content change every week. It always depends on what's being harvested, which is exciting. You never know what you're gonna get. So check out our website if you're interested in getting a healthy harvest bag. So with no further ado, let's take a little peek around the Learning Garden. So in regular times when we're able to invite folks to the farm for learning and volunteering and events and all of that wonderful stuff, this is where a lot of our lessons take place. But right now, the best thing that we can do is bring you here virtually. So this is really exciting that we're leveling up our YouTube presence and you can all see where the learning happens. So let's move over and check out our pepper plants before we talk a little bit more about what you need to know before you plant your peppers in the ground, how to best take care of your peppers, and tips for harvesting, tips for keeping them healthy, all of that good stuff. So right over here, I have 3 beds of peppers planted. So these 2 beds, and the soil looks dry, but they actually got a good amount of rain over this past weekend with the storm. So these are both lunchbox mix peppers, which are small peppers. They're yellow, orange, and red, and they don't get much bigger than this, and they're super sweet, and they're really easy to pick. So if you have kids at home, this is a really great variety to pick. They are a little bit susceptible, as all sweet peppers are, to pests and to rodents, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. Don't be alarmed, there's ways that we can avoid pests and rodents, but for now, sweet peppers, lunchbox variety. They're still pretty small, but they're growing. So as you can see, we'll do another little close-up. All pepper plants pretty much look the same. So you'll have these kind of spear-shaped leaves, they point at the ends. And when these plants get nice and big and tall and bushy, they'll start to develop their white or yellow flowers, which then turn into the peppers that we are looking to harvest. So from the beginning, all peppers pretty much look the same. But as you probably know, if you're interested in growing peppers, there's a super wide variety of different colors, shapes, and flavors. You know, we have hot and sweet. You can grow big bell peppers that are green or orange or yellow, or you can grow small, like pointy or stout peppers that are spicy or sweet or colorful, etc. And actually, some peppers are even purple on the outside and green on the inside. So you never really know what you're gonna get. There's tons of peppers that you can grow. But from the very beginning, they all look more or less like this. And if you're growing organically, you might see a few holes in your leaves. Nothing really to be alarmed of. I'm not worried about these. And yeah, so that's one bed. And then if you follow me this way down the path, we have tomatoes here, and then we have another bed of peppers. This is a different variety of peppers, also sweet, but they'll be bigger than those peppers over there. So these are called Sweet Sunrise. Some of you may have gotten them at the seedling sale at the farm. They get to be maybe not as large as a bell pepper, but they're super sweet and they're delicious, and all peppers are fairly easy to grow, pest issues aside. So these peppers are a little bit bigger. They were seeded a little bit earlier than the other ones, so you can see the same shape leaves. These are a nice dark green. And these will probably create flowers and fruit earlier than the other bed. And that's, natural. Those are younger and these have been in the ground a little bit longer. So you might be wondering why it's on black plastic. So this is actually at Newton Community Farm, we don't use plastic for our beds. This is actually a biodegradable corn gluten product. And if you feel it, it's like a really thin, really thin plastic bag, it feels like, but it's actually compostable. So it will digest back into the soil pretty quickly. So peppers are really heat-loving plants. They like sunshine, they like heat, they do really well in the summer. And usually when it's a particularly hot summer, you'll see flowers and fruits sooner because the plants really respond well to that type of weather. They are annuals here, which means that we have to plant them every year. And because they like heat so much, this material, this biodegradable plastic-like material, helps to insulate the soil. So the soil under this plastic is actually going to be warmer than the soil over here. And you can almost kind of feel it, like it's moister and warmer under the soil, which makes sense because, as we know, black is the color that we don't want to wear on a hot day. It heats up really easily, and the peppers actually really like that. So if you have access to a material like this or to some kind of black plastic, you can totally introduce that into your gardens. But as you can see from the other bed that we took a look at, it's definitely not necessary. They're not smaller because their conditions aren't as good, but they'll grow fine without the plastic. So that's kind of the overview of what's in the Learning Garden. So we definitely have some more things that we can talk about in terms of peppers. So let's take a walk back over to the Learning Garden sign. And you're getting kind of a little overview of everything that's growing. I'm tempted to show it all off because none of you have been able to come in and see it yet. But for today, those are our 3 beds of peppers. So other things to know when you're growing peppers. So they're nightshades. So that means that they're related to tomatoes, which are planted right next to them over there in the Learning Garden. They're also under black plastic because, like peppers, they like a lot of heat. Nightshades also include potatoes and eggplant and even tobacco, which is kind of interesting. So with nightshades and with peppers in particular, they're gonna like that heat, they're gonna like the sunshine, but that doesn't mean that they don't need water. So an important part of growing peppers, and anything really, is to make sure that they're getting enough water. So as you saw in the beds over here, the soil looks kind of dry, but like I said, they get plenty of water over the weekend with those storms. And usually if your plant's not getting enough water, it'll tell you. So if you notice that your pepper plant, after it's been transplanted into the soil in your garden, if you notice that the leaves are kind of wilty, droopy, or even like crispy on the edges, that means it's probably not getting enough water. So if that's happening but you're still watering it every day, you could think about setting up some kind of a sprinkler, making sure that it's getting at least an inch of water each week. One trick for determining how much water your plant's actually getting is to put a little Tupperware container or like some kind of like a plastic container or a glass jar, whatever you have, next to your plant when you're watering it, and whatever amount of water your plant's getting, you'll be able to measure it in that cup. So if you're having a problem and you're wondering, I don't know if my pepper is getting enough water, you can try something like that and see if maybe it's not.
Can you overwater your plant?
You can. Usually if you're planting outside in the soil like this, so these raised beds that are right in the ground like I have in the Learning Garden, usually you can trust that the drainage is pretty good. If you have a sprinkler, you shouldn't keep the sprinkler on all day, especially if you got rain 2 days in a row. It's kind of working with the climate, working with the environment. But if we have a thunderstorm one day and tons of rain and then a really hot 90-degree day, you can still water your peppers. But it's kind of just keeping an eye. I'd say if you're planting peppers in a raised bed, which you can do, that's when I would be wondering, how do we know that this has proper drainage? Is there a way that you can check that your raised bed has proper drainage? And if you constructed it yourself, you probably know whether it does. But yeah, definitely keeping an eye in particular on peppers planted in a raised bed, making sure that water's not pooling at the bottom and causing any of the roots to rot. But typically peppers are thirsty plants and they'll drink up most of it.
Great.
So water is one part of our journey in taking care of our peppers. Another part is soil health, of course. They're not particularly picky plants. Usually peppers respond well to a lot of organic material. So, you know, if we've been growing in the same garden for a few years, we can probably expect that there's some good organic material buildup from a couple of years of working in that soil. But peppers will probably appreciate a little bit of compost when they're transplanted, and then you can even add a little bit more later when their flowers start to appear, and they'll appreciate the boost. But otherwise, they're not super fussy with soil, so that works in our favor. So then we have water. We have that bit that I said about
the black plastic.
Yes, black plastic. And the other component of growing peppers is staking them and whether or not we want to stake them. So, you know, I have two different types of peppers in my garden. I know that the lunchbox orange is going to produce some smaller, lighter weight peppers. They're going to be about this big. They won't be putting too much weight on the branches. They won't really be causing the pepper plant to lean over once it's heavy with fruit. But something like this variety down here, which is the Sweet Sunrise, it's a little bit of a bigger product, a little bit of a bigger crop. That might cause some weight on the branches. And in that case, you know, you might do well to have some stakes set up. Like, so these are for my tomato plants. I know they're gonna get big, so I'll eventually tie some string and have a little bit of support for them when they get heavier. It's not mandatory to do that with peppers, but for something like this variety that's expected to be bigger, the plant might appreciate it.
Could you put them in cages?
Sorry?
Could you put them in a tomato cage as well?
You could.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd say they get bushy in the same way that tomatoes do, so they should have plenty of room still to fit in a tomato cage. Yeah, it's a good idea. So, those are the main considerations to take into account. I think staking is a good kind of segue into pests, so we'll kind of move into that direction. So with staking, the main reasons that we would stake a pepper plant for when those peppers begin to form, get heavier, take up more space on the plant. We can see branches snap if they don't have some kind of a support to hold up that weight, or we can see plants just kind of bend over toward the soil, and then they're susceptible to pests. So they're susceptible to more bugs, and they're susceptible to rodents, which I mentioned earlier. Especially with sweet peppers, rodents like sweet things, so they can come in and nibble, which is a good reason to stake them and keep them sturdy and supported. So the main issues with pests on pepper plants, and the reason that we would want to stake our pepper plants, is that if the plant is leaning over into the soil, it might invite in bunnies or other kinds of small animals to nibble on them. And sometimes we also see smaller bugs kind of making their way up from the soil onto the fruit of the plant, which we don't want to happen if we want to consume them. So staking the plants is a good way to kind of mitigate early on the impacts that small animals or pests can have in your garden. So assuming that your plant grows big and healthy, plenty of sun, plenty of water, healthy soil, maybe it's staked, you'll be thinking about harvesting them at some point this summer. I didn't mention this yet, but peppers are actually long season plants, which means that they take up the space that they're in the garden for up to 2 months after they're transplanted into that soil. So that means they're kind of low maintenance. They don't take as much, something like radishes are gonna be quick growers, and we'll harvest them within a month of planting them, and then we'll have to work that bed and plant something else. So that's what I mean by high maintenance. Pepper plants, you kind of plant them, you might have to weed them, you definitely have to water them, but after a certain point, they're just kind of taking up that space and taking their time to produce what you're looking for. So when we're planning out our gardens, if we have a space that we don't really want to tend to as much, peppers are a good candidate for that. But that also means that we wait a little bit for them to begin producing any kind of food. But when they do, it's exciting, and there's a few things to know about harvesting. One thing to know about harvesting is when taking the pepper off the branch, it's best to just snip them with scissors or clippers or whatever you have. Sometimes it's not as easy to have a clean break with the stem of the pepper, so just kind of not having that as an issue by clipping them instead of tugging at the branch is a good idea. So that's kind of one tip with harvesting. Another big tip is when to harvest. So if you've noticed in the grocery store with bell peppers, that's a popular pepper that we can see at most grocery stores. The orange and yellow and red bell peppers tend to be more expensive than the green bell peppers. And that's usually because, well, it's always because all peppers are green in the beginning, and they can be harvested when they're green, or they can be left on the vine, on the branch, to continue ripening to their full color. They're edible at really any stage. So harvesting them earlier is a good way also to mitigate pests, but I know I definitely want to have colored peppers. I love sweet peppers, so I'm gonna keep them on the plant as long as I can. But that's when we have to start watching out for, there's pepper maggot, which kind of collects in the bottom of the pepper. There's like aphids and other little bugs around the garden that might latch onto a sweeter pepper. So if you're really hoping to avoid any kind of pests, or if you've had pest problems in the past, particularly with peppers, harvesting them when they're green is a good place to start. And then you can also store them inside for a little while and let them ripen up a little bit in your refrigerator. So those are the two main considerations with harvesting. It's definitely possible to leave, more than possible, to leave crops on the vine and let them continue to ripen up and turn a nice, pretty color, like the peppers that we see in the grocery store. But it's not necessary, so it's useful to know that you can harvest them when they're green, or you can wait until they get some color. So that is pretty much my overview. Jay, do you have any questions?
Should we take a look at when you would monitor your plants to see how it's doing?
Yeah. So let's walk through this bed, the farthest bed of the lunchbox peppers. So if we want to take a zoom in, you can see these plants, these leaves are pretty green. These leaves are a little bit lighter green, but nothing that I'm too worried about. So I'm just kind of, usually when I come into the learning garden, I like to take a look around and see how everything's looking. And I might come down the row and notice that there's one plant that doesn't look too happy. So he has kind of, this plant has some wilty leaves. They're kind of curling in on each other. And this plant has actually not looked very good for about a week. So I'm not quite sure what it has to do with, but usually when I see one plant in a row that doesn't look good, but the plants around it seem to look happy, I'll just remove the plant. And I kind of have this luxury because I have so many plants here. If you have 2 pepper plants at home, it'd be a bummer to pull out 50% of your pepper production. So you definitely don't have to pull this out. You can troubleshoot and see, like, okay, maybe this plant is somehow just not getting enough water in this spot. You know, maybe it didn't integrate too well with its roots, and I can add a little compost and pack it down a little bit more. So there's troubleshooting that you can do, but typically if you see diseased leaves, so if you see any kind of like white spots or anything that looks like it's been a bug, I would remove that, just because if it's on one plant and not the others, it's best to get it out of the garden. So usually when I check in on my plants, I'll kind of come through, see if there's anything that I need to attend to, and kind of take out any that don't look good. And hopefully next time we check in at the learning garden, these will be bigger and maybe flowering. But like I said, they tend to take a while because they're pepper plants and they are slower.
Yeah.
So I think that's all I have. Jay, do you have any more
You're
questions?
good. Great job.
Awesome.
All right.
So every Wednesday, we'll upload a new video, hopefully continuously from the learning garden. And feel free to check in.